Hey, before I kick off the podcast, I just want to shout out Next Door Clothing. Next Door, a clothing brand based out of Bondi in Sydney. They're making really nice jeans and shirts and hats. So go and check out their full range at nextdoorsydney.com. They're also artists, so you can go and check out a range of art. They put on rad parties, and I love what they're doing. So nextdoorsydney.com for the full range.
I'm having a good time.
You are?
Yeah.
I can tell.
We are rolling.
Terrible Happy Talks. Terrible Happy Talks. Terrible Happy Talks. Terrible Happy Talks. Today's guest is Joel Mowdy. Joel is the author of Floyd Harbor, a collection of 12 linked stories that take place in and around Mastic Beach, a community on New York's Long Island that's close to the wealthy Hamptons, but afflicted by widespread poverty. Joel lived there in a family of 13 until he left for the University of Michigan, where he completed a Master of Fine Arts in Fiction. He has since worked in progressive education on 3 continents, most notably as a high school literature teacher at one of the most unique and progressive international schools in Bali, in which he currently resides. Joel is about to embark on the next chapter of his life, and that is to return to his homestead in a Lithuanian forest, where he will live full-time with his wife and son, and continue to pursue his deep passion for writing. Joel is creative, approachable, and willing to share his craft with whoever wants to learn. His passion for storytelling resonates through his teaching, and he is a powerful change agent for the students who have the privilege of being taught by him. Joel Mowdy, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Shannon.
How are you?
I'm feeling good.
Are you?
Yeah.
What's
Good to be here.
Yeah? Tell me a little bit about your morning. What have you been up to?
Well, this morning I woke up at a friend's house in Ubud because old friend I stay with, and rushed off to get to work and had a nice breakfast. It was a teacher appreciation day at the school, and yeah. Lots of. I feel like a lot of things that the students might have liked to have for breakfast. So just mostly donuts, pastries, cookies, some fruit. No.
Treat yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you find that those little things have just kept you going in this profession?
Well, certainly the salaries haven't kept me going. You don't get paid a lot as a teacher. But yeah, that's the most rewarding thing, and the thing that lasts in this profession. I've been doing it for more than 10 years now, and I've had students that I've had in 10th grade classes years ago and write to me on Facebook and say, guess what? I'm going to be a doctor soon. And that's amazing. And not just that, but thank you. So I don't know what I've done to help them become, to pursue those passions, but obviously something, and that's why you do it in the end.
Yeah. Do you find that it's those interpersonal relationships that you develop are the ones that you seem to have the most impact upon?
As a teacher?
As a teacher.
Yeah, more than teaching a subject, for sure. I teach English, I teach writing. Most of the kids I teach are not going to go on to be writers or very interested in that at all. But so the best thing I can do as a teacher is to teach those things that anybody would need in their lives. Like, if you say you're going to do something by a certain time, then do it. If you can't do it, send a message, send an email, apologize for things that you mess up on, little things like that. And that's, for me, like this year as a teacher, that's an intentional goal that I set out to do.
What's that? To develop those life skills?
Well, yeah. And I said this to all of my students at the beginning of the year. We're going to be reading books. We're going to be writing. What I want out of you this year mostly is for you to be able to advocate for yourself.
And do you feel like you've succeeded in that?
Finally, yeah, this week. Because in one of my classes and 2 of my classes, the tendency is to turn work in late and then to wait till I grade it with a 0 before they panic. And I've been getting on them all year about that. And finally with this past, I think it's because I threatened them.
Do you feel a responsibility to instill those life skills and those work ethics in them. Like, or do you feel that's the parent's responsibility?
Well, you can only do so much as a teacher. As a parent myself, I really don't expect that from teachers at all. I expect it of myself and of my kids. So if they're not doing those things, then that falls on me to do something about it. That said, not every parent is like me or you, right? Some parents, I mean, they pay a lot of tuition to have these things taken care of, and that's kind of how they see it. You have to put in the effort too.
Does that add an element of pressure to your job when you hear about the tuition that's being paid?
No. Not for me. I mean, it did at first when I first started working, because I only taught at international schools, and the amount of money that people pay to have their kids go to these institutions is a lot of money. But I've come to realize that it's not a lot of money for them usually.
Okay.
It's a lot of money for me.
Gotcha.
And I can only do so much as a teacher. So I don't go home with any. I do my job. I come in, I do my job. I do it well. I do it to the best of my ability. As a flawed human, I make my mistakes too. But at the end of the day, I'm proud of what I do, and I think I do it well.
How much of your passion for writing comes through your teaching strategies?
I think of myself as mostly a writing teacher. I know I do teach poetry, which I'm kind of afraid of poetry. I always have been, but I love to teach it.
Why?
Well, because it's a very mysterious art form to me. I don't know how to do it. Some of my writing has been called poetic, but I don't know. It's poetry is but it's fun because I'm glad that it's scary for me, because as a teacher, I always teach it, and then I go into teaching it with that idea that I'm really scared of poetry, and I don't actually read it on my own. I mostly read it when I'm teaching it, and every time I teach it, I discover that I really love it. I really love poetry, but I love it as a way of communicating with other people, discussing it, talking about it, the discovery process of it. And I think that comes across in my teaching, and that's something that I think inspires students to also not be so afraid of it.
Describe the type of storytelling that you like to use in your writing. So would you describe yourself primarily as a fiction writer?
Yeah, I do write nonfiction. I do write personal essays as well. But I have a tendency towards fiction, I think, because I think fiction can do so much more in terms of capturing capturing feelings and ideas. It gives you you have liberties to move dates around and facts around, and to make composites of people to get a point across about something.
Like you're not necessarily fact checking your whole way through it.
Yeah, I mean, even nonfiction is really fiction in the end too, because you are selecting details from what's real and creating a story out of something that's really. Stories aren't really there. We reinvent them all the time. Like we can witness the same thing, you and I, and you'll see one thing and I'll see something else, and they're both in some ways a fiction.
And it's your interpretation.
Yes.
Primarily.
Yeah.
So where did you grow up? Like Long Island?
Yeah, I grew up on Long Island, New York, and my town, where I grew up was sometimes in the papers, whenever they did like a real estate special in the papers, it would be called like something like Poor Man's Paradise, because it's a really beautiful, naturally beautiful place. It's on the south shore of Long Island. It's kind of a little peninsula that sticks out, and then there's Fire Island, this kind of line of sand that's a buffer against the Atlantic Sea. Beautiful sunsets, just beautiful waterways, and in my particular neighborhood, just a lot of poverty.
So high unemployment, and then from high unemployment, lots of other social issues, substance
abuse, crime. Because Long Island is a very expensive place to live. So it even takes quite a bit of money to be poor on Long Island successfully. So it's because it's cheap. You get people who would buy up properties there and build houses, and then you get an influx of a lot of welfare cases. So like a lot of what they call Section 8 in New York, in the United States, I think.
Yeah, what is that?
It's a housing program to help people who need a hand up to
like
be
welfare.
able to. It's like a kind of welfare. Yeah, it goes towards your rent. But because it's one of the cheaper places to live in Long Island, it gets there's a lot of it gets congregated into that one area, and then, but there are really no jobs there. Transportation isn't great. Opportunities aren't great, and it's also a working class neighborhood. It's not it's not a completely poor neighborhood. There's people with means live there as well. It's a very mixed place. But growing up in a working class family myself, my parents owned a couple of houses and they did rent them out, and we lived next to people who had nothing, had practically nothing, for many different reasons, circumstances, how they grew up, health issues, so any number of reasons why a person would be struggling, you had it.
Okay. Yeah, so when you grow up in that kind of neighborhood and you're seeing the contrast in society from rich to poor to everything in between,
Mm-hmm.
you definitely identified with that middle section of society, would you say?
Well, I would say I identified. I mean, I didn't think consciously about that kind of stuff when I was a kid living there. I just, this is how the world is, because that was my whole world. People are like this. And as I became a teenager, I started working out in the Hamptons in New York, which is a very very well-known, ritzy.
I've heard of
place.
it.
You probably have
Just
heard of
through
it, yeah.
movies and stuff like that.
In movies, they would refer to the Hamptons. It's especially movies that take place in Manhattan. They talk about the Hamptons. That's where they all go for their summer breaks, for their holidays.
They have like a holiday house.
They have a holiday house out there, right? Yeah, their second home. And working out there, you see the difference in wealth between where I grew up and that place. Did I identify as poor? Sometimes in my life. When I was an older teenager, my father lost his very steady job. He was a cockpit mechanic on fighter jets. The corporation moved to California, and he was left without a job. He became a high school security guard, and with 12 plus kids to take care of.
Excuse me?
Yeah,
How many in your family?
There's 13, and the number is kind of it's a flexible number. My mother gave birth
Why?
to 10.
Okay.
I have 2 adopted siblings.
Gotcha.
I have a foster sister who's been a part of our family from before I was born, and still is a part of our family. Not technically a sibling, but a sibling.
Yeah.
And there are countless other young people who have come and lived in my house and were taken care of by my parents at numerous times for different reasons.
Why? Were they
they
deliberately took in foster children?
Well, they not even. But there were kids who come in the summer through a program called the Fresh Air Fund. So we always had. It's a program that brought inner city children out to the countryside for 2 weeks in the summer, so they can experience a kind of normal summer vacation, without all the pressures of living in the inner city in poverty. So they always took one every year from before I was born. And actually, one of my adopted brother initially came to us through the Fresh Air Fund.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so where did you fit in the family?
Well,
What
in
number were
birth
you?
order, I'm number 4. In age, I'm number 6.
Okay.
Like that, yeah.
Did it just feel like you were growing up in chaos?
Yeah, it did. There was a time also when my cousins came for a summer to go with us because my aunt was needing some support. So my father took in. This is before we were 12. We were only, I think, 6 at the time, but she had 6 of her own, and we were living in a 3-bedroom house. And so that summer, my father had this huge army tent, we'd call it. It's a big green 20-person tent, and he put that up in the yard, and the boys, all the my brothers and I, and our Fresh Air Fund brother for that year, and my cousins, who were more than half of them I think were boys. We all lived out in the tent for the summer, and then autumn came, and they still lived there, and so we all moved inside and crowded in the house for a little bit.
Just until it got too cold.
Yeah, and then eventually they got a house in our town, and they lived nearby us for a while. But yeah, that's how it's always been. Not even to bring up the animals. I mean,
Oh, you had animal pets as well?
we always had dogs and cats and a couple of birds, like ducks or whatever else in the yard. But now we've had ponies, donkeys, geese, pet mice, all kinds of different kinds of pet rodents, pet birds, caged ones that my mother adopted from people who didn't want them anymore. She would never buy one. She'd just take the ones that are already suffering in the cage and just give them a home.
Okay.
And I don't even know how many pigs. She has pigs now. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Just loves to nurture.
yeah,
So you went to school in Long Island?
went to school on Long Island. Yeah.
And how would you describe your school years?
I hated school. Actually, I never
Why?
really wanted to go to, because I just felt, I think from the beginning I felt like it was stifling.
Stifling?
Yeah.
In what way?
Like I wanted to just kind of be outside playing,
Okay.
and they wanted me to sit in a desk and pay attention, and I couldn't pay attention.
Is that because the content you were learning wasn't engaging for you?
I don't know if it's, I mean, going back to first grade, for example. So when I was in kindergarten, my mother, let's take a step back. When I was in kindergarten, when I finished kindergarten, my mother was told that I wasn't ready for first grade because I didn't have the attention span for it. I couldn't really pay attention that much, and they would put me in something called pre-first. So it's not actually first grade, but it was a first grade classroom. It was in the next school building, so I would be in a class of first graders, but we're all pre-first.
Gotcha.
Nobody knows that. The other kids don't
Okay.
know that we're pre-first.
Okay.
And so my mother asked, well, what is actually pre-first? What is it like? And she said, well, it would be kind of like this. Here's an example. The kids will come in and sit down, and they'll all be in their desks, and I'll say, okay, kids, let's take out our notebooks. And someone will get up and put their coat on, and the rest of the kids will get up and also do that and line up at the door. I guess the logic is one kid was paying attention but heard what they wanted to hear. Everybody else looked to them, oh, we're supposed to get up and go to the door because none of us are paying attention. And that was my first grade class was like that.
I'm not laughing. I'm laughing because
No, you should
I'm
laugh.
not
It's
laughing at
funny.
you. I'm laughing with you because I identify. I was the same.
Oh, yeah.
Did that hurt your self-esteem? Because you would have had a feeling that you were in I'm not going to call it a special class, but you were
Right.
in an alternative class. You weren't really with the other kids.
Well,
Was there a damage to the ego?
kind of like growing up in the town and not really realizing that there are other ways of living in other places. I had no idea. I was completely unaware that
Oblivious.
I was oblivious to it. Right. I do remember sometimes paying attention. I have vague memories of raising my hand with enthusiasm to answer something the teacher asked, and then the next thing I know, I'm being called on, and I have no idea why my hand is up because my mind had gone completely somewhere else in the time that she asked the question. In fact, the question was probably already answered. She'd probably gone on to a couple of other different things already, and then I'm the only one with my hand up there in the back. And so what I would do is I would kind of, to avoid the embarrassing moment of I have no idea why my hand is up, I would say, can I go to the bathroom? And so that happened enough times that she asked my mother if I had an issue with my bladder.
It really was an avoidance strategy because you didn't want to be embarrassed.
Yeah, I was I guess avoiding embarrassment within that context of that class, but I really didn't know that the other classes were different from mine. Yeah.
Was that the story? Was that the story of your whole school career? Did you
that.
get to a stage where you were able to harness that concentration and start to refine it, or did it continue?
No, I think it kind of morphed into because obviously that enough of that kind of behavior becomes a frustration for the teacher, and then the teacher starts to show their frustration towards you, and then you're like, oh, you hate me, so I'm going to hate you too. And then you start to act up in little ways, and then and eventually, so I got to 5th grade kind of that way, just kind of mostly being okay. I ran away from school in 5th grade. Because once I got to 5th grade, now I had a teacher who, he was in a place in his life. I think I found out later he was going through divorce. I don't know what his home life was like, but he took that stuff with him to work. And so imagine a kid like me, who's a bit of a space cadet and has his own agenda and doesn't really want to be at school, with this guy who doesn't really want to be at his job, and then having to deal with someone like me. So he got really, he got very, like, kind of abusive in a very particular kind of way, like
vindictive type.
Yeah, like in a very quiet, sneaky way, like where he'd stand in front of my desk, and there was another teacher too. It was like this is 5th grade. There was the math teacher who also had some kind of chip on her shoulder, and so they somehow were friends. I guess it made sense. But I remember one time that they were standing. I'm right-handed, but and I still do this. I hold my pen like I'm left-handed, and I don't know why. It's just comfortable that way for me. And they were standing in front of my desk and talking about something else. And one of them says, "Look how he writes. He still writes like a baby."
And you heard that?
I heard that because it was right in front of me.
And how'd that make you feel?
Well, I was tempted to stab them in the leg with my sharpened pencil. Like that was my initial. I want to. And
so you got really angry.
Yeah, and then eventually he made me cry in that class one day about a permission slip, and then I asked for the bathroom pass, and then I left the building. I ran out of the building and hid in the parking lot, and so this kind of became notorious. By the time I got to high school, the rumor had kind of grown into this myth about how I picked up my desk and threw it at my teacher and jumped out the window and ran away from the school. And that's what people thought happened by the time, because you know how rumors grow and spread.
Yep.
And that's so yeah, I that was 5th grade. And then all throughout my school, up into high school, I think in high school it came to a head. I got kicked out of high school 2 times. And I went to an actual...
confronting teachers?
Yeah. It was like, I was emotionally unstable teenager, which, I'd get upset about things and then I'd act out.
Upset about things that you were being taught, or upset about social issues within the class?
Social issues, like girl stuff, usually,
So was it a tough time for you? Traumatic in some ways?
No, I mean... Yeah, but it was definitely, I knew it was a developmental thing for myself. I knew that I was going through something and that it would pass, but I had like impulse control issues, I guess, I would act out in ways, break things sometimes. And you'll see that in my collection of stories. There are characters who do that.
So like, is that what you're reflecting on in your writing? Are you tapping into those feelings that you had back then?
Well, to a degree, but they're not necessarily stories about me, but really my own experience that I've had growing up, and just understanding other people and how they behave the way they behave, and why they do what they do. So I do have characters with problems with impulse control or with who have emotionally unstable at different times and make the wrong decision, but it's not necessarily about me, but because I've known other people who, you wonder about how other people live and why they act the way they act, and oftentimes it reflects back on you. You go, well, if I was that person in that situation, how would I have handled that, and why? And that's kind of, I guess, why. That's one of the reasons why I'm a writer, I guess. It's because I have that curiosity.
Over the years, you've found people that you identify with in that respect, and you can compare to experiences you've had.
I could see
see
myself in other people, and oftentimes in even unlikable people, because even unlikable people have they're human beings too, and they're probably, and I try to think about that with every person, even some politicians that you're like, where's the likability? Like, are they a human being?
And you see the same qualities.
I'm sorry?
And then you actually, in people that you don't necessarily like, you can actually see some qualities in them that you have in yourself.
Well, often that's kind of the case, right?
And how does that sit with you?
I don't know. I think it's fine. I know I have a lot of unlikable characteristics because I know myself.
Do you avoid that though?
Avoid what?
Those unlikable characteristics.
No, you have to kind of acknowledge them, I think, and try to not be a certain way, I guess, or to kind of ask yourself, well, why do I think that, or why would I behave that? Why do I have an impulse to behave that way? What's behind that? And that's like the adult me, having learned how to deal with things that the younger me would do in other ways. And I'm still guilty of still acting out in ways sometimes that work against my better interest.
It's pretty high level, that self-reflection.
Yeah.
Were you doing that through your teen years? Were you self-reflecting, or were you just completely acting on
No,
self-will?
I think self-reflection came into it in certain ways, and I would know when I was doing something really wrong that I shouldn't be doing, but I would do it anyway. But there were some things that I did know I shouldn't do, and that's the other part of, I think, my personality that kind of saves me in some ways, is that I can be very stubborn in a good way. Like when I firmly believe something, I can be really stubborn in my opinion, and hold out and argue it well, and hold my ground. So one time, I got kicked out of high school twice. The second time when I came back, it was under the condition that I see a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
Psychiatrist,
School counselor?
No, it was actually there was a school counselor, and I was seeing that person, and I'd run out of his office one time and busted up some lockers, and that was that was one of my issues I had. One of the times I was kicked out, but this time I had to see somebody at a clinic that was in my town, a professional, and I was against it, but I went through the motions, and I went there, and in the second session we'd covered no ground in the first session. In the second session, she said to me, "Joel, I'd like to prescribe some medication for you." And this is before all of this prescription addiction thing kind of blew up years later. And it intuitively, I knew that was wrong. And I told her, I said, I'm a teenage boy, and I'm going through some shit right now, and it's developmental. I know it's developmental. I'm not taking any medication, and I'm not coming back here again. And I thought that would be me getting kicked out of school for refusing to follow through, but they actually did not follow up on that. And that was after the first time I came back to the school. Mm. And then the second time I was kicked out, it was because I actually wanted to go back to the alternative school, but they wanted to go back to the alternative school, but they wouldn't let me go. They didn't want me to go, because when a student from that school goes to the alternative school, at the time it was a different organization, and so any money that the school got from the state for me being in the classroom would go to this other place, and they didn't want that to. That's my guess. They didn't want that to happen, because they lose funding that way every time a student does that. So they made it really difficult for me. They gave me this form. I had to get it signed by everybody, from the nurse to the vice principal to this person to that person. Kind of had to collect these signatures in no particular order. And so I had an opportunity to go to the nurse and ask her, and she was not in a very good mood that day for some reason, and brushed me off, and that set me off, because I was really trying to do it well, and she was just kind of said something really mean to me. I can't remember what it was. And so I left their office, and I slammed the door, and the glass in the door shattered. Broken.
Big scene.
And that set something off in me, because I knew what was going to happen for that. It's like, so I acted out on that, and I got angry, and I was yelling. And the principals came down, and I sat in the office for half the day, and then they had a meeting, and then they came together. They invited me in eventually, and they said, "I'm sorry to say this, Joel, but we're going to have to kick you out." And I said, "Thank you." This is what I was trying to do, but I was trying to do it in the formal way. But and so I got to go back to the alternative school, and I graduated from there.
So when do you feel like you started your creative writing journey? Did it start in high school? Was there a teacher?
No.
Who got you started?
Well, if I had to go back, I'd probably go back like to the alternative. The inspiration probably started with the alternative high school. I had an English teacher who, and they didn't really teach you at the alternative high school. They gave you a lot of undeserved encouragement, which is everything you did was like, good job. And if you fucked up really badly, they were like, okay, we forgive you. Gotcha. And that was it. And it was magic. It was like, wait, you could just tell somebody they're doing a good job because they tried, and then you could forgive them no matter how badly they mess up. Wow. And did that every day? Yeah, every day was like every day was a clean slate. And then what that did to me is I had so much respect for those people because they had so much respect for me
and compassion.
And so when I did something really bad one time, I felt really bad about it. I felt guilty. I felt shame. And that was my punishment. That was my entire punishment.
Did you start taking more ownership of your behavior with that approach?
I did. I absolutely did. I felt like they deserved better from me. And so
was there a shift in your self-confidence as well?
Slowly. I felt better about myself. I don't think I felt confident from that yet. It took time. But back to that teacher, though, he was really into Arthur Conan Doyle. And he was really into Middle English, and he had studied it as a student, as a college student. So he brought that passion to the classroom. He would just read Sherlock Holmes stories to us. He would read from Old English text using the proper intonation and voice, and I was just fascinated by that. Mostly by his passion. I mean, yes, the stories were great, but also just how wrapped up he got in it. And I said, I want to feel like that.
You felt his enthusiasm and passion?
Yeah, you feel the enthusiasm and passion.
You know when it's genuine.
Yeah.
And that inspired you. Can you explain what Middle English is exactly? Is it Middle Era English?
It's like there's Old English, which is the very arcane.
So it's a time.
Right, it's a time period. And the Middle English is kind of... I guess
turn of the century, 1900s?
Before Chaucer a little bit, I guess. Okay. So it sounds different. It sounds like a different language, but you can grasp it as English, but it's just a little bit off.
So were there any books that you were maybe prescribed by a teacher or somebody else that you really engaged with and got you really excited? Like as a teenager or early 20s? What was your favourite book growing up?
Well, I don't know.
Any standouts?
I read a lot of Calvin and Hobbes as a kid.
Okay.
I wasn't a big reader. I didn't read a lot. The funny thing is, the first time I got into reading a lot was when we had this. Like I said, my mother and father had a couple of houses, and we had one cottage, it's like a small house behind our house where we lived, and they rented that out. And this woman lived there for some time, and one day she just disappeared. She owed rent. She disappeared. She left a note and said, "Sorry about the rent. I have to go. You can have my stuff." And her stuff was a huge box of videotapes of TV shows that she taped off the television and other movies, movie collection. And she had a whole bunch of books about serial killers. No. And I asked her, can I have this stuff? My mother said, yeah, I don't want it. So I because it was fascinating. Like, we didn't have those kinds of books in my house, and it was horrifying, but it was also in some ways fascinating. And so I had all these books, and I started reading those books, and from there I read a few mystery books that were laying around my mother's house, laying around the house that my mother had around the house, but I wasn't actually, after that I didn't go seeking anything to read. So yeah, no, I wasn't a huge reader.
Did you? Sorry. I'm just thinking of, it's funny, as you're saying that, I was thinking about my first book that I ever read that just got me so just psyched and inspired, and I can't actually identify one, but I do know that I was always intrigued by biographies and autobiographies and things like that. I just love hearing about people's stories, and it had to be real. I don't identify with fiction. I need that reality.
Right.
And it's almost voyeuristic.
And I think that's at that young age when I had those books about these terrible people. I mean, or sick people, if you will. I don't know. That probably was what drew me in. Is that this is real. This really happened.
Yeah.
And that could happen was horribly fascinating. And the question for me that kept driving me to read more was why? Why did they do that? And just trying to find the reason why. And I think that speaks to the fiction writer in me too. Is so writing fiction, you write about characters, yada yada yada, but it's really about understanding people for me. And why does someone behave that way? Why in that situation do they react like that?
Okay.
Under these circumstances.
So you've got Lithuanian heritage. Is that
No, I have a Lithuanian wife.
Yeah. And you own property in Lithuania right now?
Right.
Okay. So she feels a real strong yearning to go back there? Or?
Oh, we all do. We all actually do.
Why? What's that?
Because it's just a beautiful place to be.
Is it?
It's the population is not so big.
Clean living?
We live in the forest most of the time. I'd like to say we're homesteaders, but we don't get by homesteading. We're very novice at it. we're learning how to do it. But just being in the forest for hours on end without any Wi-Fi connection, having to bring our water into the house, having to get the wood, having to take care of the yard and the garden, there's always something pulling at you to take care of it. And I think never before in my life have I felt so attached to a place because I like to think of.
Do you do your best writing there?
I do a lot of. I've rediscovered writing there.
Okay.
And in a way that was where there were no intrusions.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing. It's like this. You could be out in the yard working. Now we have 2 acres of just grass, mostly some rundown buildings on the property, all beautiful wooden kind of dilapidated shacks. Trees everywhere you look, in every direction. A dirt road. The sky is huge in Lithuania. I know the sky is the same everywhere. It's not really true. The sky in Lithuania is just enormous. It just goes on forever. And as you're, cleaning out the outhouse or raking up the yard or cutting the grass or something like that, it's not like you're just doing that. You're also having, thoughts. You're thinking about things, and they're going, and you have deep thoughts, and then you have all this landscape, which just kind of holds the thoughts for you. So, all of these little nooks in the woods that you can look at, and you remember things that you thought when you last time looked there. So it's almost like your mind expands from the place. That's the best I can describe living in the forest. And so when I'm there, like when I'm here or when I'm out of the forest, everything gets kind of packed away. Like I have to write things down, in this notebook, and I got to log it onto my computer, and then I've got all these other issues coming at me, and like my mind space just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and more inside myself.
Is that because you're having to deal with domestic duties, work responsibilities?
Well, I don't know if it's the same because
are you more removed from that stuff
because I still have more to do in the forest, but it's all very necessary things just for for that moment. I need to get up and I need to empty the bucket of water under the sink. I gotta get water going for my kid to wash up because we don't have a shower. We use a bucket and a huge tub, and then it's a big process. So the place keeps you busy with things to do, but it once you've mastered those things, you don't really master them. You've kind of mastered a kind of pattern or a strategy, and then you're doing those things. It's like cutting wood, right?
Well, it's less convenience, but I'm starting to realize that less convenience is actually more calming and slows you down because you have to slow down.
Yeah.
Like even just for me living in Bali, the fact that I have to go and buy my 20-litre bottle of water.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we run out and it's like, well, I just have to drop everything because otherwise we're going to dehydrate.
Right.
Have to get on my motorbike and ride up to the shop. And same with electricity. I've got no electricity. I have to go and prepay it. And even just those things have slowed me down, whereas I had too much convenience sometimes.
Right.
And I find it almost overwhelming because I feel like I have to do more and progress and try and get ahead. But with that stuff, it's not trying to get ahead. It's just trying to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you feel?
Yeah, it's just, getting, what you need to get through your day. You're focused. It really focuses your attention on the immediate. You're not thinking about what the future is going to be and, what happened yesterday and worrying about something that happened in the past. It's really taking care of things that are right in front of you.
So
keeps you grounded.
You've just had a published book.
Yes.
And is this your first official published book?
This is my first published book, yeah.
Okay. And prior to that, what was your experience leading up to it? That's at the moment, that's where you're at. But what got you to the point where there was a company that actually wanted to publish you?
Okay. Well, I'll start from the beginning. I got out of high school, like I said. I was about half a year behind, graduated from high school, from the alternative school. And for the next 3 years, I kind of just loafed around my hometown doing nothing. Eventually, I moved to one of the boroughs, Queens. I moved to Queens and lived there for a few months. And I worked part-time, and I couldn't find a really good any good job. But I also had a moment of because I was away from the largeness of my family and spent a lot of time by myself, that was probably the first time I had that clarity of mind where I could really think about my own thoughts. And there was a lot of just negative thoughts in my head. And I was like, where do these come from? Whose voice is that? Because it's not mine. And, I unpacked that slowly and I started to defy that voice in my head, which was saying, because I liked to draw when I was younger. And I think I had a lot of art teachers. I had one good art teacher when I was very young, but the rest of them were very strict and you draw a line this way and you do that way. And that's part of the voice in my head. But I heard that one particularly because I really liked to draw at one time, and then I wasn't doing it anymore. And I was erasing a lot. And so I was getting back into drawing, and I started, every time I heard that voice telling me not to do something, I just kind of started just to defy it. And I started making, to me, very interesting drawings. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I like this. And I got, that's when you asked before about when I started to feel confidence. And I got the confidence from basically having that reflection about where does that come from? Where does that negativity come from? And then unpacking it and defying it. And that gave me the confidence to go to community college. At community college, I wrote an essay. I was terrified when I did it. I wrote it. The professor said it was good. And I said, great, I'm going to be a writer.
And what did he say? Go for it?
Yeah, well, I said that to myself. I didn't tell anybody else. I did start telling my family I was going to do that.
But let's go back to that.
Yeah.
It just felt right? Was it just something innate that said, you know what, that was good? And
this is the thing I want to do. Yeah, it was like drawing to me in some ways because, I mean, there are rules, but you could break them. And it's about building something up and crafting something. And I was always into doing that kind of thing. And for some reason, and I'm a low gear kind of guy. I don't like to do things that require lots of gear. I live in Bali and I don't surf because I've seen people who get into surfing. You don't have a surfboard. They got 20 surfboards because sometimes the waves are different that day, dude, and you got to have the right board. And I don't want to go down that. I really don't want to go down that path. And I tried surfing and I thought it was fun, but I'm like, that's enough for me. I tried snorkeling and someone said, you want to go diving? And I'm like, tank, mask, this, that, flippers. Nope, don't want to do it. Too much equipment.
Too much commitment.
Too much. Well, I'm not afraid of commitment. Like I said, it's all the equipment. It's all the stuff you've got to have to do the thing. To be a writer, you really have to, besides, having the gumption to get out and just do it, you have to have something to write with and a piece of paper, really, the most.
So you were attracted to the purity
the
of
least,
it.
I mean.
So you're attracted to the purity.
Yeah, just the
sheer-
simplicity of it. Just the simplicity, the seeming simplicity of it, I guess. That you don't need to have, a lot to get started with it, and to keep doing it, you don't need to have a lot.
Well, what kept you going then? So you must have gone through phases of, lack of inspiration. And
Of course, because I was, from my community college, I went to university. I transferred, and I had a great teacher, Zachary Lazar, who's a great writer, and teacher, and just a great human being. And he encouraged me. He liked my writing, and that kept me going for a long time. And I started submitting my stories to get published, and it wasn't happening. And it didn't happen for 20 years. Like, I just kept submitting
to
journals and magazines.
Like an article writer?
If you're a short story writer, you have to, in order to get a book published with short stories, you have to have stories published in journals and magazines. That's how you get started. Or if you're going to be a novelist, eventually you start out with stories, and
to build your resume.
You publish. You kind of build up that way, and it just wasn't happening for me. I had this one story I had published in a very very obscure expat Italian online multi-interest journal or something general interest journal, which is like a weird place. Nobody's going to go to look for a story. Grateful for it, but it was that, and that was it for the longest time. Nothing was happening. I did go to Michigan, which was really difficult program to get into. I heard I got in
Michigan University,
University of Michigan Creative Writing Program. How
did you get in? Based on high school grades, or just
no. You for an MFA, you get in by submitting a story and filling out the admissions form, and keeping your fingers crossed.
So
and
you
hope
had
that
to
you get picked.
submit some work.
It's just like going to graduate school. You apply to go, and one of the things in your application is a story, an essay.
And they were impressed.
And you have you have to have references too, and Zachary Lazar was one of my references, my main reference. And
so would you say he's someone that actually identified your talent fairly early?
Yeah, he did. I mean, I was hoping I was good at it, and I put it in front of him. What do you think? And he liked it. He said it was
affirmed?
Good.
Would you say?
He's one of my one of the most important people in my life, I would say. Yeah, absolutely.
Still good friends with him.
Yeah, good friends. He's a mentor to me still.
So you'll go to him. Will he proof your work?
He's kind of my unpaid agent, which brings us to Floyd Harbor, because he's had a lot of great and deserved success with his work, and he's now doing some great work with prisoners in Louisiana. Yeah. In New Orleans, down in the prison there. He's doing writing workshops there in the prison. He's helping a friend of his who's a convict. He's helping him get his book published. So he's doing all this really great work down there. What was my point? I just want to talk about how great this guy is.
Oh, well, you said that he's a mentor, but like what I'm finding interesting was that you said early on that you didn't really look for external affirmation to become a writer. You said you felt it within, but it sounds to me like as you progressed, you started to realize that you needed guidance.
Yeah, because I started with it was bravado for me. It was, the whole thing of going to community college for me was also like kind of like a dare I made for myself, and I was doing it out in the world what I had started doing with the drawing, which was to hear that voice, recognize it, and then say, fuck you, I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's why, so, when I went to community college with that attitude, so I signed all the classes I was afraid of, I signed up for, because I was afraid of communication class. The scariest thing for me was doing that, and I signed up for it.
And that's why you wanted to do it, because of the fear.
The fear.
That's so interesting, because I've heard numerous people say that just recently. Like, why did you put yourself in that position? Because I was scared. So I felt compelled to take it on.
Yeah.
And that's how you felt.
That's really interesting, yeah.
And it's a common theme. And if I reflect on my life, I must admit I start to want to keep putting myself in those uncomfortable, out of my comfort zone situations.
Well, to bring you into this, you're doing it now, aren't you? I mean,
possibly.
in some ways, right? Doing the podcast, and can I talk about you, Shannon?
It's not about me.
I want to talk about you though,
Sure,
because I've known you as a physical education teacher, you know, and then you say, hey, you want to do a podcast, and suddenly I'm like, oh, I don't know this guy at all. There's lots of things about him. There's lots of things about him I don't know. It just makes you a more interesting person that you have you know, that you've wanted to do this, and you just said, I'm doing it, and you just go and do it.
And is that how it transpired for you? You went, hey, I feel great when I do this. I feel it deep within.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like what you said. I had this bravado. I wrote something, and you didn't need someone to tell you that it was good. You're like, hey, that's really fucking good. Like, check me out. I really love that because, you know, I think for me personally, my mind goes to a place of, I guess, shame. Like I do something that's out of my comfort zone and I'm petrified of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thoughts that come to my mind is, oh, that's not that good. Oh, that's
mm-hmm.
hopeless. Like, oh, I don't want anyone to see that. They're going to judge me, critique me, and I'm going to feel like a bad person. But what I find interesting is that did you suffer from any of that self-doubt as a writer?
All the time. I did. And
is that where your mentor came in?
It's just, yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. He's very early on, he said, I want to show some of this to my agent, you know, which to me was mind blowing because I just kind of started out like, you know, less than a year before that, but I really wanted it. And I really worked hard at it. And focused at it, and that there was some kind of payoff for it happening. I was like, okay, that was encouraging for sure.
And what was the agent's response like?
It's nice, but not for her. But that's fine. I mean, that's expected. And then getting into Michigan was a huge deal. But then any writer will tell you, disappointments stack up. You deal with a lot of rejection, a lot of people telling you no. Usually without a reason. So you have to start wondering yourself. And then, you doubt things. You're like, was that person who said my stuff was good just being nice to me? Were they pitying me? And so those thoughts do get back in. I'm not safe from them. They come after me. And that's the thing. So I kind of became a teacher out of necessity, and I loved doing it, and I started doing that, and then the writing fell to the wayside. And after some time, in Bali, I actually started working on a young adult fantasy book with my wife. We started writing it for my son, and then we wrote it for. Is that good? Okay.
You're good.
We started writing it for my son, who was like 7 years old at the time, and made the character a little bit older than him, so he'd be engaged with it. And 7 years later now, and we've gone through 7 drafts of it, and that process for me too was a big learning process in my writing, because I wasn't very big on writing like plot focused things, which some of the stories in my collection are they don't rely heavily on plot. Some of them do, but they rely more on like
character development?
Yeah, characters, situation,
dialogue.
There's plot in there, but it's not in the foreground. It's not like a foregrounded thing. And then by writing this adventure, this fantasy eco-adventure story for children, and then for and then it developed into for young adults, and so now it's all based in Finnish mythology. It's really intense, actually. I can't wait to one day get it out in the world.
Finnish mythology.
Finnish mythology, which is really, really a rich mythology.
So is this something that's pending, as something that you?
It's something that is finished, that needs to find. I need to find an agent to represent it, or perhaps more feedback from early readers on it. But I think it's ready to go out into the world.
So when did you? Can you maybe tell me when you had a breakthrough moment with your writing, when you finally
Oh, so this.
Well, I guess is this
Back to the book.
Well, wait up. Is this book your breakthrough moment in your writing career?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so like I said, I finished my job in Bali the first time around because back in 2014, that's when we bought the homestead in Lithuania, and I wasn't consciously intending to go back to writing my own stuff, though I did talk about it here and there. And after I got settled into the homestead, I thought I had some things I wanted to write about, and it was nonfiction. And I didn't think I could get back into writing fiction. So I started writing essays and sending them out, not worrying about where they went. I just wanted to write them and put them out in the world. Kind of thinking of like when you make a paper airplane. I imagine a guy in an office building making a paper airplane, really crafting it nicely, and then just out the window and watch it float down, and then get on to the next one. So I started doing that with my essays, and some of them were getting published. I was like, oh, this is good. I never had it.
But you were taking it lightly.
I was taking it lightly. And I thought, well, maybe my stories can also, maybe I should have the same attitude about those stories that I wrote and I cherished and held dearly and was very proud of. And maybe I just need to kind of treat them like that paper airplane and just get them out there, whoever will take them. I'd be happy for you to have them. So I was submitting them to everywhere that I thought would be a good fit, regardless of like the readership or how new they were or how obscure they were. Just like, let's get them out there and start clean. And the rejections started coming in. Just rejection. Because, they're not typical stories. They're not the typical kinds of stories. They're not about the typical kinds of characters people tend to read about in those journals. So I get that.
From a marketing perspective, are publishing companies going, well, I don't think we could sell a bunch of that?
Well, it was well, that's different because the publishing company that it went to did take it. It was the journals, the magazines that were not publishing them. And that, like I said before, that's the traditional route. You go, you published in journals, you have enough publications that way and enough stories that kind of fit together into a collection, and then you put them into a book, and that's how you get a book of short stories, typically. So what happened with those is, I was sending them out, and the rejections weren't stinging me at all this time. I just, keep sending them out. I kind of found it kind of laughable that once I let my guard down and I'm going to send them anywhere, and anywhere was saying we don't want them.
I love how you're laughing about this, but keep going.
Well, because, it's a good ending. And at the same time, out of the blue, Zachary Lazar says, hey, I was thinking about this particular story that you wrote. What are you doing with those stories, by the way? And this story was from years and years and years ago. And in fact, he called it by the wrong title, but the title he called it was better than the one I had, so I ended up changing the title. What was the original title? The original title was called The Game, which is kind of dull, and then he called the story Golden.
Okay.
But I knew what he was talking about because the story begins, one summer I dyed my brown hair blonde and combed it in a Caesar style, and I roasted in a tanning bed twice a week, 20 minutes at a time, cooking perfectly around like a rotisserie chicken. And that theme of somebody making themselves into like a golden figure of some kind, and then the idea of the theme of gold kind of keeps coming up in that story. That's why he called it Golden, and I knew that, and I was like, that's a better title, and I changed it. And then I told him I'm actually sending those stories out again, and
to journals or publishing companies?
I'm sorry?
To journals or publishing companies?
I was sending them to journals. I told them I was sending them to journals, magazines, literary journals, special, like interest mostly in things like short stories and poetry and things like that, personal essays. So I told him I was sending them out, and he said, well, do you have enough for like a collection? And I said, and I didn't. I looked at my computer. This was all over like messaging, so I had time to go and check. And I had maybe 7 stories that I thought were okay at that time because I was starting to look at them more critically again. And so I got back to him, and it wasn't enough for a collection. So I got back to him and I said, I think I have 10. I knew what I was doing to myself. Because I knew it was coming. He was going to help me out. So I was like, he's coming back to help me out. So.
Cashing checks that you can't.
Yeah.
Really.
So I said, I think I have 10, but I have some new ideas for them, which I didn't. I just knew they could be better. I had some new ideas for them that I'd like to work on them for a couple of months, because he came with an offer of I can send them out to, I'd like to share them with if you have it, with my agent and with my editor, perhaps. And that's why I made up this kind of, a bit of a lie, but
well, do you think you were doing that to give yourself some real motivation in?
I was not losing an opportunity, because the opportunity was coming, and I'm old enough and wise enough now to know not to pass up an opportunity.
To
right,
play the game a little bit.
So I said, okay, I'm going to give myself a little bit of time that I need. I'm not going to just jump into it and say, here's my stories, because they weren't ready. They were good, but they weren't where they needed to be. So I bought myself some time. It was May, and I said, can you give me till September, and I'll give you a manuscript? And he said, yeah. Get to work. Like, all right. So
Amazing.
And I was in the homestead, and I had already kind of gotten into a writing rhythm there. And so I took all my work out, and I printed out copies, and I looked at it, and I said, okay, this is what I have. I have these stories. And then I dug up 3 more, and I'm like, these are good too, but they can be better. And I was already starting to see how, because I had the deadline and I needed to get it done. And I put it all to, at the end I had 10 stories, and then I looked at it again. I said, okay, it's not complete. There were 2 stories I knew I needed in there. And so from end of June to the end of August, I wrote 2 stories, and those 2 stories make up like about a quarter of this book, actually. So I ended up writing about 50 pages towards the collection. No, 50, 60 pages in those 2 months. Wow. That became two of what I think of the standout stories in the collection. Yeah.
Wow. Like, maybe, like, I'm just curious, like, do you have a particular time of day when you work better? And do you do you have a set routine that you must stick to, that you find really is a formula that works for creativity? So, I mean, some people are here, they say they have a morning routine. They've got to get up, they've got to stretch for 10 minutes, then they've got to drink some water, then they've got to have a coffee, and then they're ready to go. Right. Do you have something like that going on, or is it?
No, I think for me, like, the best, when I'm in the creative stage, when I'm actually just getting words on the page, the best for me is to be alone and to put myself in a place. And I don't write every day.
Okay.
And I'm not an everyday, set the timer and sit down at the desk and stare at the blank page and wait for something to happen kind of writer. I need, like, ideally, I would love to have, every time I sit down to write, like a full week by myself, just to kind of, I don't start right away either. I have to do all of the chores first. I got to get everything set up, and I've got to, get the water, and I've got to do all that. So the homestead is the perfect place for this. And I basically bring myself to a place where I'm just bored out of my mind with nothing left to do but to do the writing.
Like, you got nowhere to run.
I got no, and I sit down with it, and then I tell myself, okay, you have permission to write the shittiest thing that you can possibly write. You're allowed to do it. Mm-hmm. And then I just let myself just go, and I just write, and I don't care where it's going. One thought leads to another, and out. This is kind of a very new process for me, but it reflects back to the way I was drawing back in those days in Queens when I had my first clarity of mind, and was just telling, well, that something's telling me don't do that, but I'm going to do it.
Is there a cost to your family?
No.
Why is that?
Because I think we luckily we are all kind of introverted people to a degree. We love each other's company, but we also love to have time alone sometimes.
Your son included.
Yeah, he self-regulates that. He's very good at that. He has lots of friends. He's very good at making friends. But he's also good at knowing when he's had enough of people and can just go off and be by himself, which is good.
Doesn't need that validation.
No.
So is that why the homestead in Lithuania is also a great place to blend the two, family and writing?
Yeah, absolutely. We get a lot of time together. It was great. I spent almost 3 whole years there the first time around, and my son was just turning 10. Now he's always been a student at the schools that I worked in, so we'd be around each other a lot. But to actually have that immersive time together, your kid only, and sometimes I feel like I've learned this a little too late, is that your kid only grows up once, and there are times I feel like, well, I could have been more present probably during that time of his life or during this time, because I think every father does that.
Absolutely.
Whether they're guilty of it or not. But that time was, I think, a real blessing to be able to spend hours and hours with him and to do things with him, just to really be around each other and to go out and do the chores together and dig up the potatoes together and make a little film together, or just homeschooling stuff we did with him. Yeah,
do creative projects together. That's so cool.
Yeah, so I got to do all of that, and I got to finish my book, and I got to play in the dirt. So.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I kind of see writers similar to actors, musicians, artists. I mean, having those breakthrough moments seem like people dedicate their whole life to it. It's so hard. It's so oversaturated, and to really stand out in a huge crowd, it can be described as being like a needle in a haystack sometimes. But you seem to have, to get a published book by a reputable company is quite a breakthrough, in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
So you've kind of achieved what many are really striving for. What was it like then when you had your book launch in New York, to go from being alone with just the notepad and the book, trying to get your ideas out, to then the other end of the journey where it's published and you're at a book launch? Was that just surreal?
It was really weird.
Why?
Because you, I guess, wish and hope for that kind of thing to happen.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's great. The whole, being out in front of people and talking about the book, it's all wonderful. It's not writing. It's not writing. And that's, and
what do you mean it's not writing?
It's that part of it isn't the thing that you've been doing. It's like, it's not the thing that and so I'd be driven by and at one point early on, I think everybody does that. They imagine how great it would be to be acknowledged for it, and it is great. It is great to be acknowledged for it.
So was there media involvement? Was there?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, but you always feel like you're on and for me, I always feel like it's kind of happening around you, but you're not like.
Is there anxiety around it?
Yeah, some anxiety.
Fear
some anxiety.
That it wouldn't be a success. Fear that it'd be not well received.
Well, I think being ignored is worse than not being well received. That would be worse.
Are you saying any publicity is good publicity?
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah, you don't want everybody to say it's crap for sure. But
so the publishing company actively promotes your book.
They do. They're a really great company. Catapult. They work really hard for their writers, and they. I mean, it's a beautiful book just to look at.
It is. I mean, the cover looks great.
Yeah, it does.
Like it's appealing.
I couldn't imagine it looking any better than it does. It's really, really amazing.
Why don't you read us a passage?
Sure.
That'd be something different.
All right.
Is there a part of it that maybe pick a part that, like, I don't know, like a page that you really like, that you personally like?
Okay.
You personally read and go, yeah, like I'm stoked on that. That's fucking awesome.
I'll read something that's kind of old and new both, because this is from an old story. It's called Chubba Chuck, and it's about this jingle writer, musician, who his girlfriend leaves him, and he kind of retreats to a kind of farm on Long Island, like a farmhouse, to kind of initially to kind of reinvent himself, I guess, but then he just falls into depression and does nothing, and ends up doing something really stupid at the end. But I wrote the story a long time ago, and I did workshop it. Workshop means like you bring it to discuss in front of other aspiring writers in the workshop, in the classroom, in like my graduate program, and it really put a lot of people off at the time. And I felt bad about this story, and I ended up kind of losing it. I threw it away. And not intentionally threw it away. I just kind of ignored it enough.
Why did it put them off?
That it disappeared. Because there's a scene in the end. Where the character visits a prostitute, picks up a prostitute, and he pays her for a sex act. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of off-putting, I guess. So yeah, I think that threw a lot of people off. It was a bit squeamish. But my wife really loved the story, and she was upset that I got rid of it. That I didn't, like I said, I didn't get rid of it. I ignored it enough that it disappeared, kind of like a child might run away if you don't pay attention to it.
So you actually, you took the feedback on board.
Well, yeah, wrongly. I was, I kind of fell victim to like other people saying whether it was good or not, and trusting myself. And I felt bad that I lost it, and so I resurrected it actually. Years later, I worked on it. I had worked on it so much that I remembered it almost verbatim, and so I think I recaptured it almost verbatim. But as I was doing that, of course, you can't rewrite the same story. So other things happened. New scenes came up. Suddenly there were buffalo living in the backyard, which wasn't there before. So all these great things happened in this story about this jingle writer. And then this is one of the stories I took out to revise 2 years ago when I was putting together my collection to send off to Zach. And I took this one out. This is a great one. It's good, but it needs something to it. And then here's a part that I added. So it's a story about a jingle writer, and I ended up adding in this great little background bit that became a thread throughout the story. And it's about how he came up with this, with the title jingle. The story is called Chubba Chuck. He writes his breakthrough piece of work is called Chubba Chuck.
Let's go. I'm excited.
And this is how he came up with it, and this was the background situation that concerns this piece of music, which goes all the way to the end too, and which is part of that prostitute scene as well, in its own way. Okay, so I won't read the jingle, but I will read the creation part. The first time John heard the Chubba Chuck melody, he knew it would take up residence in a dark corner of his brain, ready to creep out in a hum in the shower, in traffic, while waiting for the ATM. The jingle worked its way into his warm-up, a little riff he'd bang out on the keys while Louis tuned his guitar, Lon checked his mic, Isaac rattled a cymbal, and Tommy walked his fingers down the neck of a bass. The melody was sticky. It had come out of John complete in a home recording one pot-infused winter afternoon. He shelved it, not knowing what to do with 30 seconds of a hook that didn't want to attach to anything resembling a full-grown song. He tried, though. The whole band tried, but finally Lon said to just leave it alone. "It's a gem," Lon said, after devoting an hour of precious studio time to John's obsession. "It's a little masterpiece. I get you, man. Sometimes a lyric comes to me, and it just lands in me, and it's a hummingbird. It's a perfect little hummingbird. It's beautiful. But you gotta go. You don't cage it. Get me? Love it. Acknowledge it. And then you gotta go. You get me?" "So you don't think we can use it somehow?" John said. "Because I think there's something to it. I think it's worth teasing out." Tommy, ever helpful, suggested they turn the ditty just as it was into a hidden track tacked onto the end of the album. Easy. Louis, though, said 5 rock songs followed by 30 seconds of synthesized xylophone was not really an album but a demo with 30 seconds of synthesized xylophone at the end, which was not only unprofessional but weird. Isaac agreed with Louis, adding that they'd be lucky if anyone listening to the demo would ever make it that far into the CD. Isaac was in 5 bands. He knew what he was talking about. Plus, the session was costing them out of pocket, and they should just stop fucking around on utter nonsense. "He's got a point," Lon's girlfriend said. "Let it fly." "No, yeah," John said. "I'm just throwing ideas around. Let's shelve it for now." "I agree." Kimberly left John about a week before the commercial debuted. Okay.
Ew. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Man, it's funny, as you're reading it, I'm thinking, I'm hearing it from the author. I don't know how many times I've read books and it's my voice that I'm hearing.
Right. But
I'm actually hearing the voice of the person who had the thought. And it's surreal and it's authentic, and I also thought, I wonder how many times he has revised and read that passage over and over, proofread after proofread. Yeah.
The funny thing about that passage, that particular passage, that one just came out. That was one of the things that I just...
Organic.
It just came out, and it was kind of scary because I kept throwing these characters in there. And they don't really reappear in the story that much. They're kind of a band he was in. at the time that he came up with this little piece of music that was catchy and inspiring, but it was nothing more than that. It wasn't going anywhere. And he was really trying to push it further out and to be something more than it was. And so here I had the situation where he's trying to do that, and he's with these 5 other people who are not really a big part of the story outside of that scene. And it's not something you really want to do in the beginning of a story, is throw a bunch of character names out there. But you know, that's where it becomes important that each of these characters has their own piece of input that kind of defines them as a person and shows their relationships amongst each other. You have Lon, who's this kind of this cool band leader who has all these cool expressions, and his girlfriend's in the room. Like nobody else has their girlfriend there or anything. And they're in a recording session.
Can I just ask though, without giving too much away?
Sure.
It's 12 stories.
Yeah.
And is there any linking amongst the characters from story to story?
Oh yeah, there's.
So you know, in my mind, I go to almost like a Pulp Fiction type. I go all the way back to Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
Like, could it be described like that? Like, you know, because you know, when I remember the first time I seen Pulp Fiction, it was like, I just didn't get it. No one's ever made a movie like this where it was just a series of stories, but then there was some really subtle yet major links that happened
right.
at the end.
Okay.
And then when you watch it the second time, and you go, oh fuck, I get it now.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I had to watch that movie
that.
twice, 3 times before I got it. You know, so how would you describe that?
Well, there are links like that between a lot of the stories, but they don't all link in that same way. The one thing they have in common is that all of the characters are from this town, or the story takes place in this town, Floyd Harbor. There are some plot things that connect to the stories. There are scenes that connect the stories. There's one incident that a lot of characters either witness or hear about that happens one early morning. A young man gets arrested at a gas station. He's naked. He's at the gas station. He's got the nozzle from the gas pump in his hand, and he's threatening the police with it. So that's a story that kind of keeps that's an incident that keeps coming up. Some of the stories are connected because they do happen on the same day, or the characters in one story and another story. There's a story about a teacher who's an aspiring writer, but it's actually really based somewhat on me, but really on the teachers I've had, and I've kind of lumped together into this kind of composite character. And there's a kind of a suggestion that maybe he wrote the stories. So it's like there's all these different connections that happen, and not one of them is the correct one or the wrong one.
Amazing. And I mean, it's been an epic conversation. You're kind of you are the first author that I think I've ever really interacted with on a personal level and professional level sometimes.
Oh, cool.
And I'm really intrigued, and you know, it's been an epic conversation.
Yeah, this has been really good.
It's been an hour and 17 minutes.
You're good at this.
Well, you know, again, I think what I really respect about you right now is that you have made a decision to walk away from something that's quite good, very comfortable, and step into the unknown. And you do know where you're going, but you don't really know what's going to happen, but you do know that it will give you a means to follow your passion.
Right.
And like, I'm really intrigued by people like that, and you're one of them. And I really feel that not enough people do it, because they get caught in the daily grind, and they get caught in self-doubt.
And the fear.
And absolutely. The fear and the anxiety around it, and the judgment, and I feel that you're someone who is saying, this is what I want to do, and I'm doing it.
Well, I worry all the time. I do. So I'm not free from that. But one thing I do know from just my experiences in life is that when you step into your fear, it's usually rewarding.
Man, I think we need to end on that note.
Great. And
I agree, that's where the magic happens. Is there anything else you want to say?
Just thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to do this. Had a great time.
Thanks for being on, brother. And we've got some responsibilities. Let's go grab a coffee, eh?
Yeah.
All right, let's go, brother.
Let's go.